Hello, we're talking today about inverse trig. This is homework from your book, page 878 to 879, 3 through 19 all, 27 through 29, 35, and 36. We're going to start with number 3. Number 3 says evaluate the expression without using a calculator. Well, if we're not going to use a calculator, we definitely need to use the unit circle. So in class, we learned about inverses and how we can find an inverse on the unit circle. So just a little refresher, if we're trying to find the inverse sign, and let me just write it down kind of like over here. So if I'm trying to find the inverse sign, I have to look at the right side of the circle. Okay, so only this right half of the circle am I looking for my inverse sign values. If I am looking for the inverse cosine, I am only looking at the top half of the circle, right? Where the x is reflected over, but only on the top half. And then if I'm looking for my inverse tangent, again, I'm going back to the right side of the circle. Okay, so inverse sine, right side of the circle. Inverse cosine, top of the circle. And the inverse tangent is also the right side of the circle. So this lower left-hand quadrant never gets used when we're finding inverses on the unit circle. Then I have to remind myself, okay, well, what are things I know about the unit circle? I know that all of my points are cosine of theta, comma, sine of theta. And that's going to help me when I'm looking for the inverse. So, for example here, if I'm looking for the inverse sine of 1, that's asking me where is my y value, because my y value here, my x comma y, my y value is my sine value. Where is the sine value equal to 1? So I would take a look on my unit circle and I would look at my sine values. Well, there's only a place where y's are 1, and that's here at 90. So then I would say, okay, the inverse sine of 1 is equal to 90 degrees. So when you're doing the rest of it, you know, if you're looking for a cosine, you're looking specifically at the x, but only on the top half of the circle. If you're looking for a tangent, remember that tangent is y over x. So if you're looking for tangent, look for the y over the x, what that value would be. If you have any questions on finding that without a calculator, just come see me later. The next couple are pretty easy because it just asks me to use a calculator. It says, use a calculator to evaluate the expression. Number 12 is the inverse sine of 0.18. So for this one, we just have to punch it into our calculator. A couple of things that I will mention is that the inverse sine is its own function button. Okay, this here is not really an exponent. Whoops, let's go back. This sine to the negative 1, it's not an exponent. So for most of your calculators, what you're going to have to do is press Shift and then the sine button to get that inverse sine on your calculator. And then you punch in, 0.18. The other thing that you have to make sure of is that your calculator is in degree mode, because if it's not in degree mode, it will give you, it'll be in radian mode most likely, and therefore you will not get the right answer. So when you plug this into your calculator and we do it in degrees, you'll get about 10.4 degrees. And it's pretty much that simple. It's just, do you know how to use your calculator appropriately to evaluate a sine function in degrees? The last problem I'll do is problem 27. It says find the measurement of the angle theta. So they give me this lovely triangle, and they give me the angle of reference theta. So if this is my angle of reference, I like to label what I have in relationship to that angle. Well, this is my opposite side, this 5, and the 8 would be my hypotenuse. So I have O and H. Then I ask myself, okay, which of my functions, SOHCAHTOA, S-O-H, C-A-H, and then TOA is TOA. Which one of these deals with O and H? And that would be the SO, which is our sine function. So that's going to help me when I set up my equation. I'll say the sine of theta is equal to my opposite, which is 5, over my hypotenuse, which is 8. So now that I've set up the function, now I can use the inverse sine to solve for theta. So if I take the inverse sine of both sides, these will undo each other because they're inverses, so I'll be left with theta on this side, and then I'll be left with the inverse sine of 5/8. I would then punch that into my calculator, and my calculator will tell me that the inverse sine of 5/8 in degrees is about 38.7 degrees. So make that about, there we go. If you have any additional questions on this material, please see me, Mr. Daniels, and enjoy doing trig.